which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Mr. Manager, you want to call the roll? Who's he just here?
Yes. Dave Douglas.
Here.
Roland Tufts.
Here.
Marie Miller.
Here.
Ruth Lyons.
Here.
Matt Nixon.
Present.
President Trump.
Thank you. And we do have Patty Williams with us via the OWL, and she's taking our notes while visiting. We are on to the town manager's report.
Okay, welcome everyone. Public hearings for this year's town warrant will be held in Don Russell Meeting Room at the Topsham Municipal Building on April 7th and April 21st at 6:30 p.m. And town meeting is scheduled for May 25th at 7 p.m. at the Mount Ararat Middle School Orion Center. Update from John Shattuck. I will be here tonight. A couple of things from him. Midcoast Council of Governments, MCOG, Board of Directors unanimously approved the appointment of Mr. Matt Eddy as the new Executive Director of MCOG. Matt, who is one of the founders of the regional organization that evolved into MCOG, will assume his new role on Monday, April 4th. And Androscoggin Animal Hospital is featured on the Topsham Business Directory page this month. The Topsham business has also been recognized by Down East Dog News as the 2021 best veterinarian hospital in the state of Maine. So they're featured on their webpage. That's all I have. Thank you.
Any questions of the manager? No, thank you. Down East Doggy Magazine. So we will jump right to an update from the planning department. Rod Melanson, town planner. Come hither. This is the new one.
All right. Good evening, everybody. Rod Melanson with the planning office. I provided a memo, which also had a link to all of the online ordinance amendments that are going next Thursday to the planning board for public hearing. So these are, in fact, may or may not make it out of that meeting. So we anticipate them going forward, but we'll find out next week. The first one in my memo here is the road acceptance request for what's known as Mountain Road, connects Evergreen Circle at Highland Green Village Drive to Can-Am. That's being brought forth. I did have a little typo here, actually a big typo. It hasn't had final inspection. That's happening hopefully pre-April 7th. If not, then pre-April 21st, to give you guys an update about that being inspected by Public Works and peer review engineer. The next one there is the amendment to the multifamily housing ordinance. We're looking at a small amendment within the mixed-use commercial Topsham Fair Mall zone. Increase the density for multifamily housing. It's kind of a small step for a bigger issue of housing, but we felt like this was something that needed to be addressed. We kind of, the recode efforts really going to be looking at that in the downtown commercial areas. But the planning board, it's a big topic, so they wanted to take a small bite. Solar energy conversion systems. This essentially is another small amendment that deals with multiple parcels under one control, ownership, or lease, where they're keeping the property lines and there's internal property lines. So they want to connect there and not have to meet structure setbacks by code. So that would just allow for 0 setbacks on internal property lines, not the perimeter. Signs. So years ago, about 10 years ago, there was an update to the sign ordinance that had a 10-year sunset clause on non-conforming signs. So we are at that time right now, and the planning board had a lengthy discussion about it. That non-conforming signs go away naturally when they get changed. For instance, if this sign was non-conforming out front and we wanted to put a new sign up, then we'd have to conform to the code. This was forcing businesses and what have you to change their sign. Tom Lister would have had to, will have to travel around and send a letter to everybody with a non-conforming sign to change their sign. So the planning board is thinking that it might be better to just non-conformities go away when changes actually come. Signs need to be updated or change, business change. So that's that amendment. Historic district. The historic district in that ordinance, it mandates a public hearing on every application. We're simply looking to change that to mandate a public meeting and not publish in the Town's record. The last one, it's a homeowner coming in for an addition. We publish a $60 ad. We don't receive that in any kind of application fee or anything. So we're still continuing with the meeting notification postcards sent to all the butters, posted, and as any other public meeting, just removing the public hearings. Addressing officer. This one is a simple, today it's, the language is the tax assessor is the addressing officer. We're looking to change that to call it the addressing officer. That which is appointed by the town manager, it could be the fire chief, who's familiar with E 911 regulations, it could be the tax assessor, which it is, and it will be Justin, but Justin was requesting that to change from tax assessor to addressing officer. The last one is not going to the planning board. These are just code changes. Chapters 91, 115, and 124. These are chapter 91's building construction, chapter 115 is electrical standards, and 124 is fire prevention. All just housekeeping. These are updating our ordinances to reflect the state codes that they're running under anyway. There's no, and this is not something from, this is Tom and the fire chief. If I need to do any more digging on that, I can, only hold a public hearing.
I get it, because that's what I was initially thinking is we were already following these state guidelines.
They do, but we reference Boca 96 still, for instance,
Okay.
IBC, that kind of thing.
Okay, so there's
this
still
is-
other references. So
this
that's why
is-
we have to. All right, I was thinking if we already state we follow X, why would we need to do anything? But I guess if we have other.
It's cleaning up, it's just cleaning up.
Any questions? Yep, Ruth?
Yeah, signs.
Yeah.
On signs, could you just briefly say that again?
Sure.
Because my thinking is if eventually, if the planning board's going to change, then why change it? Why make them non-conforming, I guess?
You think there's gonna be a larger change in regards to
Yeah,
signs?
if there's
No.
an update to it, that's
No,
what,
we're not,
okay,
yeah, no.
Okay.
So, but the current language has a 10-year, currently it
Right.
says from the date, so 10 years ago, so 2012, the town adopted the ordinance, it was a 10-year sunset that included all non-conforming signs, and I'm not sure that that was the intention of that language. Well, I think it was specifically electronic message centers, but it developed all non-conforming signs. So that would force, the town would then now have to go out and tell people to remove their non-conforming signs and conform. The discussion the planning board had was even within this past 10 years, anybody who's put up a new sign has to conform. So instead of forcing, let's not force it. Businesses will update their signs when they do, and at that time, they need to meet the code.
thank you.
I don't have a question. Mine is only just a comment. You said the multifamily in the MUC is just a small bite, but isn't it potentially more than small? It could be a pretty decent help to the community and to the town being able to. do
Yeah,
that,
but
right?
it wasn't a comprehensive, we didn't look at the whole town.
Right,
This was
even in that small-
I should have said focused.
Okay, but even in that small area, we could see some
Yeah.
fair amounts considering we have 0 today.
Oh, yeah.
So 5 is a good thing, right?
Yeah.
And so once we accept the road, we're immediately gonna change, our new addressing officer is gonna change it to Can-Am, is that how that would work?
Yeah, we don't want it to be multiple, single road, multiple lane. Yep, issues, that's pretty confusing for 911.
Any further? Plenty more time to make comments. Thank you, Rod, appreciate it.
Yep, thanks.
Any public comment tonight? Anyone have correspondence?
No.
Huh?
Quiet.
I know.
I know.
I thought you said, yeah, I'm like, really?
Great, sorry.
Anyone adjustments? Consent calendar, approval of the minutes for regular select board meeting, March 3, 2022. So all that's moved and seconded by Ruth. All those in favor? Unanimous.
Oh, I wasn't there, I'm sorry, I can't do that.
You can still move it, I guess. Well, why don't,
I'll move.
so it's been so moved. Now Patty, it's been moved by Marie, seconded by Ruth. All those in favor? 4 and 1 abstention. Public hearing, unfinished business, old business, new business. Look at us go. 22-15, consideration of any appropriate action on appointments to the Voter Registration Appeals Board. Oh, please come on.
Hello, I'm just asking for your approval to appoint those members that I listed on the memo.
My only question, and I don't feel it's anything the town wants to get involved in or wants to say anything, because it's each party has their choice. So my question is, we look at one of the parties, they put in 2 members of the same household. And as we've now come out of a pandemic where when one maybe gets sick, the other one, does this have a potential for slowing down a process if where one party puts 2 people out of the same household for something? Does this, having this one party do this potential, and it didn't matter which party it was, it's just if they both couldn't be there, does, for any reason, what happens?
I'm not sure, we've never had a meeting.
Oh, okay.
We've never had a meeting. It's a new board. There was a board in the past many years ago, and then it was kind of went to sleep, so we reactivated it. Those were the people that were nominated by the committees.
Yeah, and I know we're not gonna get involved,
Yeah,
but it
and I
just,
have no option other than,
I just wanna make sure what we have to perform as a community isn't slowed down because of that choice. Is if there was some sort of appeal, right? That's what these are based on. It's time sensitive.
20 days to
Okay.
act on it.
Maybe it's just a conversation, not that we're gonna do anything,
Right.
just say, hey, folks, what's gonna happen if we can't act quick enough because people aren't.
I can meet with them and ask how we would handle it.
And they can do whatever they want, right? That's their group, but so that was the only thought I had seeing that. I thought it was, when it's time sensitive like that, I was wondering how it would be.
I don't think they had a lot of options.
Right, I'm sure, like every other committee, right? Any other questions, comments? So I would make a motion that we appoint the 4 individuals for the Democratic Party, Gail Eaton, the alternate William Eaton, Republican Party, Stephen Littlefield, alternate Diane Bernasoni. Second, moved and seconded. All those in favor? Unanimous. Thank you. Appreciate it. 22-16, consideration any appropriate action on authorizing the Energy Committee to apply for a Maine GOP-IF (COPIF) Community Action Grant here at the Municipal Complex LED street lights. Good evening.
Hi,
How are you?
good, how are you?
Excited?
You got me, 35 Prospect Street. Chair of the Energy Committee. So yes, the Governor's Office of Policy Innovation and Future, GOPIF. I want to announce that on March 11th, the Town of Topsham did get accepted to the Resiliency Partnership. A big thanks to Rod for preparing the hazard mitigation self-assessment, which was crucial to the process, and then to Kate as well for submitting the package and putting that all together so we can now apply for grants. So update on the grant. And we have the next 2 years to apply for grants, so there's going to be 4 opportunities, and we're going to make this deadline tonight, hopefully, for the one due March 22nd. And there'll be further opportunities for more grants. It's just that there'll be an update to the process that we've just completed every 2 years. So it's just, hey, have you done any new things on your checklist? And how are you doing on your hazard mitigation front? Which you said you did good at and did use it well at, so that kind of thing. So basically, we, the Energy Committee, along with the planning staff and the assistance of Derek, have drafted the grant proposal for $46,000 to change out the LED, change out the lights and the fixtures in the municipal parking lot. 26 bulbs there for $46,000. It requires no match from the town, though we did put in staff time match to oversee parts of the project, which would include like RFP, submission, reviewing those, and then, implementing the actual work to get those installed. And so basically we need to get this out by March 22nd. And I guess the ask is that we allow Derek to sign off on that grant application. I don't know if you want to add anything
No, I
else.
think you covered it, but yeah, I'm happy to answer any questions about the application and project.
In kind or just a straight grant?
Just in kind service, but there's no like financial match whatsoever, but we're putting down a line item that we're providing a service that is worth something.
Sure.
Any other questions? Yeah, this is great. It's nice too. This is that first step in that LED process, I think, and let's vote. So that's my take. So I will make a motion to that the board instructs the town manager to sign off on the Maine GOP IF Community Action Grant for submission by March 22nd, I believe you said, for the municipal complex LED streetlights.
Second.
Motion and seconded. All those in favor? Unanimous. Thank you very much. We appreciate it.
We'll be back.
With a big check from the Price is Right. 2217, consideration any appropriate action to consider a request for an additional caregiver retail store licenses in the town of Topsham. We received a request last week, 2 weeks ago, 10 days, somewhere in that range, to reconsider the number of licenses that the town of Topsham has for retail caregivers. I believe right now it is, in that category, we allow 2 licenses within the town. We do have other we have other limits and such for manufacturing and such, but this is specifically for additional caregiver retail store licenses. Do you want to take us there?
Yes, Ryan Holmes, 50 Adams Landing Road. Thank you guys for getting a chance for me to get in front of you once again. For the purpose of kind of this, what I've been thinking a lot back from the history of where we started bringing in licensing to the town of Topsham. And a short history of that, some of the reasons that we limited a lot of the licenses because we didn't have a lot of known facts. It was a new industry. There was a lot of unknowns, a lot of concerns that we didn't know how to address or how they were going to be addressed. So we kind of put out a request for a couple of licenses to see how it would go. Some of the concerns that we listened to were things like and they're all concerns that I had as a business owner and some of the other people did as well. But a lot of the stuff was that we thought it might bring illegal activity to our town. We thought maybe that stores might start pumping in like left and right, and we might just see cannabis everywhere we go, which would also bring an increased exposure to our kids. And how are we dealing with cannabis and children at the same time? Those are just a few of really the concerns. There was, there was no way to highlight them, no way to address them. After a few years of cannabis going through, the industry as a whole has really developed into something that we couldn't have anticipated even 2 years ago when we allowed for this to happen. This industry has matured very quickly, and it has matured into Maine's #1 cash crop. And as it sits going through with medical cannabis, we also have the adult use sector that is now live. We have a mature medical market and we have a maturing adult use market. They serve different purposes, and maybe that's a debate for a different time, but on the medical side specifically, one of the reasons why I'm requesting to put in an additional storefront is it allows businesses like myself that operates as a delivery only service to begin with a greater level of transparency to help continue to address some of these concerns that we may have. Given the trends that we see now, we're not seeing an overflux of businesses coming in and cannabis shops opening up everywhere. We do have some cannabis cultivation licenses that have been given out, but those are all tucked away in small little places that most of us don't even know exist, even though they're right on the side of the road. With all of those things that are coming out, I think it's important that as a town, we allow not only businesses to develop, but allow those businesses to help the community. And what I mean by that is allowing another storefront gives us an opportunity to educate people at a bigger level. A delivery service can only see so many people a day, but a storefront can have more people walking through the doors that give opportunity for us to educate. It also brings a greater level of compliance to the game. In an email that I sent out to you guys previously, one of the things that I mentioned was, although we do only have 2 storefronts in our town, we have well over a dozen delivery services that operate within the town. And they're not people that live in the town necessarily. They may be Lewiston or Auburn or Bath and Wiscasset or Bowdoin or anywhere surrounding, but they have delivery radiuses that encompass Topsham. With that kind of being a part of how our medical industry works, it's also, I think, important to give patients of ours greater access. These delivery services that operate, they don't have bright, flashy signs. They don't have, hey, come look at me, come check us out type of thing. And that really stalls for the education of the patient because you just can't reach as many. Having additional storefronts in the town will give that opportunity for patients that are in this town. And we do have a large portion of our community that does consume. I mean, whether we like that or not, it is a part of what people do nowadays, this town and towns over. We are noticing in the town a vast growth, as you guys can tell by the real estate going up and no inventory and traffic counts being high. I've even heard about how high Maine or 196 is as far as traffic counts compared to the state, and it's one of the busiest roads that we have. I do think that additional storefronts will not hinder other businesses either, because I do think that was another concern on the other side of the spectrum, saying that if we had too many stores in here, how are any businesses going to be successful? I do think that kind of has been hopefully dismissed a little bit as we have stores that just get bigger and bigger and bigger and take on more and more people. There is room for growth in the industry. As the industry develops further, as it grows bigger, it requires almost more. And it's kind of like why we get more gas stations and why we're getting another grocery store and other things. Cannabis would just fall in that kind of mix of needing an additional store to meet the need of our growing community and the needs of our community as well.
Any questions right off of Ryan before we open it to anybody else? No. Ryan, you talked about how quick it has grown, both sides, since it's all been legalized. And you said that it's quicker than we ever would have thought. More has happened than we'd ever thought. Isn't that a reason there to continue to be slow as we have been with Topsham? Because it has grown faster than we ever thought it would, and the business has gone quicker than we thought it would. Isn't that still a reason?
I would say that there's probably merit to that conversation. And I think that we're not going backwards at this point.
Correct.
So we've grown to a point where it's widely acceptable. Businesses are open. There are cannabis shops across the state. Maine is known for cannabis at this point. We do have travelers that come through specifically seeking this out. I don't think those numbers are going to decrease. So given the slow approach like we're going now, maybe adding one license now and then revisiting again through the unknowns. I mean, that's the thing, is not to push too aggressively or too fast. And that's more or less what, as a member of this community, I would like to see. I think this community does a great job at moving forward at the pace that is required, because some things we can't control. But with this, as far as going slow, yeah, probably. But I don't see it going backwards. I do see it just getting bigger, bigger, bigger. How quickly that happens, we don't know, because as everything grows and you have more people entering the market, you have a greater supply. And if that supply and demand ever gets imbalanced to a certain degree, it may be like that now. there will be a flux of businesses coming in and out. And that's part of the industry, that's part of anything that's new, that's growing, that's kind of forefront of any kind of industry in general. And really, the safe thing to do is to go none or one, or two at the most, but it's more about just, there's the supply and demand, and then there's the demand and supply. And right now, there's just such a demand that as a community member, I kind of think it warrants the ability to maybe offer a chance for growth.
So let me ask you, sorry, Ron.
No problem. I just have one question. And you said repeatedly that business is booming. What's the basis for that statement? I mean, what's the sales line, for example?
So when I say business is growing quickly and it's booming as an industry, we're seeing the state is now reporting numbers. Beforehand, there was no way for us to tell you how the industry was actually doing. But on the Office of Marijuana Policy, it's all public information now. They report how much has been sold on a monthly basis, and we're just watching those numbers climb and climb to the point of the adult use sector is well over $15 million a month in revenue across the state. The medical market is seeing similar numbers, slightly smaller than that, again, across the state. But we can track those trends now because the state is finally starting to collect data. As a business that's been in it, we're in our 5th year in this industry. We've seen growth, we've seen plateaus, we've never seen dips. But there is more people, I think, accepting the idea that cannabis exists and that it is an acceptable use for medication. Whereas before there was some reluctancy. And as a business owner, what I find is that there are people that just get to their wits' end where there's no other choice. And they resort to cannabis as just that last resort. And they find success with it. And then they become activists for it. And we're seeing a lot of that. And we're seeing a lot of people, the fastest growing population for cannabis consumption is women ages 45 to 60. And a lot, I know it's not what you would think, but it is a sign that times are changing for cannabis consumption. Another fast growing rate is within the retirement community. And we all know Topsham has a large retirement population. But to give access to those people as well and to be able to educate and inform, I do think cannabis isn't all rainbows and unicorns. It's not a magic fix cure all. It's not something that we should just go all in on and say, yes, we're going to take the money, because that's not really what it's about. There are drawbacks to cannabis. And I think it's very important that we have businesses that are willing to talk about that and talk about ways that we can address some concerns, or maybe even just have conversations about concerns. But again, it really requires a brick and mortar to do that.
I got a question.
Go for it.
I've read a couple of articles recently about regulations for the medical industry and how the Office of Marijuana Policy has been trying to promulgate a couple of rules over the last year. And most recently, I think about a month ago, they got a lot of pushback from the industry.
They did.
Do you know much about that?
I do. What Matt's referring to is there's new laws and rules that are proposed. The proposals come from a sector of lobbyists that would like to see the medical market, and to a degree, I feel the same way, a greater level of oversight and compliance. And there's nothing wrong with that. And the pushback is simply because what's happening in that medical market and why the fight, if you want to call it that, exists, is simply because they're limiting the size of our medical businesses. My wife and I have our caregiver cards. We're limited to 500 square feet in a room. But at the same time, when the state wants to increase the levels of compliance by tripling the actual cost of business, it's really hard to justify having a business that can even be successful when you're limited with how much you can actually grow in a year. And that's kind of where our pushback is. Why aren't we allowed to expand our businesses to meet those compliances? Because yes, we want that. To me, I do it anyway because it helps with business decisions. It helps track data, and data is very important in this industry, especially when there's no data to draw back on, historically speaking, because we're paving the path. So I think a lot of this stuff will continue to go on. I mean, there are a sector of people that will fight because they don't want it in compliance. They like the small business side of it. Again and again, though, I think that's going to go back and forth. And the state recently decided that they are not going to pursue any rule changes through this session anymore. So they've stopped anything that's going to change for the rest of the year, and they're going to revisit it next year. It certainly, the industry certainly provides its challenges, and it is something that, like you guys, may have tons of questions in the industry, and you have nowhere to go to get those answers. And as a professional in the industry, I feel that we are the ones responsible for educating the general population so that you guys are aware of what's going on. And part of the reason I say before you guys today is just to continue with that model of information, being able to be transparent and to show that, like I said, it's not always good, it's challenging, but at the same time, people deserve to know what's going into their body. They need to know what companies are good, what companies are people, or how to stay away from, what are red flags that you should look for, what are questions you should ask your provider. These are all things that you guys should know. If you were to pretend that you were somebody trying cannabis for the very first time with tons of questions, who are you going to go to ask? That's the big thing. And how do you know you're going to get the correct information? And it really comes down to a Google search, or a sign that you drive by and go in and ask questions if they let you in and if you get the good feels. So this is more or less, again, I'm dragging on the same topic, but this is all part of the reason that I think another storefront might not be a bad idea.
With the growth that we've seen, and I agree with your comment that we're not going backwards. Topsham, at the very least, is where it is. And I believe it will eventually continue to move. I think there'll be somewhere and there'll be acceptance more and more people will be. But understanding the side of the business, so recreational side, isn't there far more rules in place for that side of the business versus the caregiver side, whether it be from tracking from beginning to end of product and such like that? Are we better off to look at one recreational store rather than any more medicinal? And is it true that medicinal allow 18 to 21-year-olds?
You can get your med card at 18.
Okay, so
that has to be done through a provider or a certificate from a certified individual. Yes, you
whereas
can.
we limit 21 on the recreational
That's
side.
correct.
Okay.
That's correct.
So what would, and I'm not saying I'm supporting, right? I'm just, it's that devil's advocate.
Yeah, and I love
Why are
those.
we not?
The biggest thing about the adult use sector is the rules for compliance are much stricter. There is a track and trace. So from the moment you plant a seed in any soil or medium whatsoever, that seed is tracked all the way to the end consumer. So they know, so the state can record how much data is, what that plant does, how much does it grow, how much is it producing, and how much is it going out the door. This is preventing out-of-state overlines from happening. And it's holding these businesses accountable to make sure that they're buying product that's coming from in-state and from legal businesses. On the medical side, that system does not exist, and that's part of the system that they're trying to include into the medical market. That's kind of back and forth. On the side of recreational or adult use, because of that compliance factor, there's a higher cost of entry into that industry. And with that higher cost comes a lot of different things, usually money related. And if I were to play devil's advocate and say that there was one rec store in here, it could be a good thing, but it could be something that also draws lines out the door, and the company that comes in could market things differently in a recreational way versus a medical way. And that's the part that kind of makes me a little nervous. I wouldn't say that we're not ready for it, a rec store, but in the eye of going slow and watching the market and making sure that we do things at the right time, I'm not sure this may be the right time, because again, we still have too many questions and too many concerns that we can't really answer yet, as those stores just kind of started popping up.
Last question, and I get some for Rod too, because I think he gets a lot of. So we've had a lot of conversations. You come in, you talked about the business, you talk about the industry, and you want to teach. we add one, there's a possibility, right? Multiple people put in and it's however it goes through, it may not be you. How many people do you feel in your industry are at the level of talking about the business as you are? You're always trying to talk about it, educate, talk. And that concern, and you share a concern, I believe, is get the wrong people in.
Yeah.
And they don't care and it's about pushing it out. How many of you, I mean, are we
There's
talking,
lots, there's lots.
there's a lot of good guys, I guess.
There's a lot of good guys, but there is a large spectrum that flows from the bottom to the top. And that's the industry right now.
Yeah.
One thing that I think we've started to prove and show is that one of our concerns, for example, was that, you know, we're just allowing drugs to be dealt legally in our town, if you will. And that, you know, there's a black market or an illicit market, and then there's this fair market where it's regulated. What we've noticed in the industry and at the state level will even tell you is that the rates of illegal drug sales from like going to your guy in the alley, those just don't exist anymore. What does exist is people moving larger product on a larger scale in and out of state, but it doesn't go directly to the end user. So if there is somebody that is at the level where they can afford a storefront, because in all honesty, the overhead of a medical cannabis store is not cheap, I would imagine that they'd have to be established, well-funded, at least have the ability to give the presence of a medical storefront. The other factor is finding a location in Town of Topsham. If you don't have a location, we limit it, and there's not really much for sale. So it's really dependent on who you know, what you know.
Any questions of Ryan? And if we have more, we can ask. Just, I know Rod handles a lot of the stuff from his office. So I would like some overview myself. And then
I'll ask later. I
Okay.
just-
you're coming back up.
Okay, that's fine.
Hey, Rod. Second basketball school. So I know I get a handful of emails a year, share them with the group of people looking to do things in Topsham, usually on the recreational side, I believe. What do you experience? What's,
Yep, we get a lot of calls that have actually probably slowed down a little bit recently, but yeah, so our office works with the clerk's office to bring forth any applications that are eligible to get in front of you folks for licenses. In the history, I mean, dates back quite a bit. It tops, and we had a land use called dispensaries when that law started back in 2008, maybe. That has since been removed when we did this whole licensing program here. You folks will remember we did the referendum. That was a non-binding vote by the citizens that gave you folks direction. We set up a committee. We spent at least nearly a year maybe. That had industry folks and citizens, a planning board representative as well, to develop what finally got adopted at town meeting. The clerk's office keeps a tracker of all of the active licenses. This is something I didn't prepare for tonight. I apologize, but there is a waiting list that folks can pay to be on. And I don't know the status of that. That's something we can check on in case a license becomes available. So, you know, businesses close down, that opens up a license, or they violate and you throw them out of town, whatever. Yeah, we have a system in place, I guess. And there definitely are a lot of inquiries that then kind of fizzle away when they, so yeah, all the recreation wants to say, no, that's not allowed, they don't come back. But there definitely is, you know, part of the industry is cultivation. There's a lot of calls there, product manufacturing. That was the most recent one that was licensed here. There's a few constraints just naturally here as well. For industry folks and what have you, there's only so many places that licenses are allowed to be. Not all commercial zones, there's just a few. I don't know them off the top of my head. So, you know, there is limiting factors anyway. you know, the process to get to where we got to is very extensive.
Where we ended up and now where we are, feedback that you've received, feedback that you feel, how have we managed it? And then I know it sounds like once it goes through your process, you're out and really the clerk and such paying attention. Is that accurate?
We're still in the program of helping out with the clerk's office. At some point, the planning office, the only reason the planning office would really be involved in a new business is really site plan and new buildings, additions, or what have you, actual construction. Businesses that move into existing structures are not, that's a code license.
Right.
These businesses are regulated by the licensing scheme that you folks control.
Yep.
So that you know where their location is, you know their security plan, all of that stuff.
Yeah.
So it really is good scrutiny of, legitimate business moving in and operating to the code.
Anyone else have questions of Rod? And you can call him back at any time. But just I think that's it for this second.
Okay.
So, yeah, I'm Jenna. I'm just calling everyone by name because there's only a handful of people here.
Well, probably figured why I was here, so good evening, Jenna Godo, 2 West Wind Drive. I wanted to respond to this particular topic tonight, as it remains a topic of concern for me as a parent, a resident, and a public health professional. So my education comes from the different side of cannabis, so to speak. So there are a couple basic impacts that I've consistently addressed when coming to the select board and town meetings when marijuana has been an agenda item. 1, the increased access to youth, and 2, the ongoing normalization of yet another substance leading to decreased perception of harm and how this impacts use. Increased youth use is a major concern for me. Science tells us the impact of marijuana on the developing brain, and it's substantial evidence. But tonight I really I want you not only to consider that, but the impact that more changes have on our youth, but what this really means for our whole community, like overall. I was a member of the town planning group that recommended the rules specific to those, to these governing businesses, which were eventually adopted, the ones that we all are speaking of. And I actually, so with the majority of that membership being those within the industry, I was the only consistent non-staff, non-industry member of that committee. I think there was a police representative for a meeting or 2, and I think I might have been the only one, maybe one other person at one time. So these recommendations were agreed upon and provided the opportunity to have the retail caregiver businesses within town, but were balanced with other community and public health considerations, such as density of outlets and advertising restrictions. Those were a couple of things that we discussed at great length. Well, I know that medical marijuana has been legal in Maine since 1999. The pace of growth has been concerning, especially over the last couple of years. So not only are we seeing changes in how many retail outlets we see as we drive through our neighboring communities, but there are many other changes. Ongoing changes with the rules and laws. I don't feel that they are actually in as solid of a place as perhaps Ryan does. New legislation, oversight, and the still and ongoing development of the Office of Marijuana Policy, the pushback from industry, the ways they're trying to make it all work is still, and other additional changes just to simply the adult use. It's all in the mix and it's all still happening. And this is including of the medical industry. So we are still in the initial stages of what the marijuana and cannabis industry impact will be within the state of Maine, in our town and on our youth and even to our adults, frankly. In my opinion, changing the allowances now is risky and a very slippery slope. I encourage the continued opportunity to settle into what is now and what we're learning now from the recreational or adult use and continued learning from the medical that's in a different place than it was even 5 years ago. and really truly understand the impacts in all these ways before any additional changes are made. So I thanks for your time and your consideration for this perspective.
Well, any other questions of any of that? So you said you were gonna have another question, Ruth. Do you want to get it now?
It's not.
We want to
really-
start talking?
It's a statement, really.
Okay, so let me go over what's being asked, just so we all understand. So this would be the initial process. If this was to happen, it would be a change to our code, we need to go to a town meeting. So this is the very first time that it's been discussed and talked about as far as the increase. We all know we have our town meeting in May. There is still an opportunity to place items on that with the public. You know, we still need to do all of our normal work. Whatever it would take to, you know, writing of the ordinance and changes from that office, working it through public hearings and such. So there is time, but it's a tight time. I'm not gonna say it's impossible, but it's tough at this point. Doesn't mean that we wouldn't have some other town meeting at some other point. So that's where we're at. This isn't being decided tonight. This would have to go to a town meeting. So there would be many more steps, but this is that first step to get it talked about, one or two. I think Ryan, you had written one in your email. Did
I
you
just,
say that?
I think if I did, I meant to just write consideration for additional licenses.
Okay.
I didn't have a number in mind. It was more just for you guys to consider, because I know I'm the one asking, but I'm not the one guaranteed for it. You know, there's no guarantee for any of this through the licensing process.
So Rod, last thing, you talked about this waiting list. Is that waiting list also on the medicinal side too? Okay. So that's where we're at. Anyone want to lead us off, give our thoughts?
Wow.
Because we got to do something.
I might as well be the person. First of all, I want to say, Ryan, you're a great presenter. And you do an excellent job, and you do present both sides, and that's appreciated. I happen to agree that I think we have to approach this slowly. I think we have the two, I think. And I know it's probably expensive, but another year to see what the stats are coming in is probably where I'm coming from. It is where I'm coming from. And I do worry about the youth, and I do worry about more storefronts with medical marijuana or recreation marijuana in a community. But so that's my statement I have to make tonight. I certainly think, for me, if a year you brought back a presentation with more stats and the state knows what they're doing, then certainly would be considered, but I think we should take this slowly. Slower.
When,
So there's a couple of things. One, do we have any information about situations where it's been determined that youth users obtain the marijuana, cannabis from a medical user? Is there any evidence out there of how they're getting it?
And I would argue no different than kids that get it from their parent, get liquor from their parents or from someone who's 21. But I hate to say that this is, you know, a perfect world, that it's definitely not. I mean, but there are, I can tell you that it's not part of the other reason for storefront and the exact, what we're talking about with children or kids or underage. The camera systems automatically log everybody coming in. And part of the requirement is, as anybody comes in, you're to check the ID and card in front of the camera, so the cameras record and identify that. From that point where it reaches the patient, does it exist? Yeah, probably. I mean, to what extent, I don't think that we could even do. We may probably be able to draw information from the Midas survey. Is that accurate about?
Mihas doesn't provide information about where exactly, but anecdotally from my partners and the people.
Jenna, can you come up closer, because our funky little owl thing is how we're transmitting.
Yeah, I think that's probably one of the reasons I continue to be really concerned about this, is because we know that substances in general are accessed by older, by family members, by their older siblings, by older neighbors, and that the whole thing. And we do know that from people who work in the schools, who focus groups that we've done, that anecdotal conversations with law enforcement, or that they're getting it from sometimes within their homes. So that does exist. And I think that exists for, like Ryan said, it exists for alcohol as well. But it's just an increased access. That's the continued concern, is the increased access in a number of different capacities.
I agree with Ruth to the extent that I would I would wish the state would provide more data, or have the ability to collect it at a more regional level, or municipal level, just so that we can see, has it really grown in this area?
They do it by county.
They do it by county.
So there's Saginaw County data.
Okay. That's good.
How you get the COVID data too.
And it'll show you how many caregivers there are from 2000, I think 2001 all the way through to now. Numbers have changed.
So that includes the sales volume?
No, not sales. Sales is more like the past 2 or 3 years that they do that. And they do that through sales tax forms that we all fill out on a monthly basis, and pay our sales tax with. And that's where their data comes from. The idea that, increased ability for us all to get it, I think that at this point, you can go and walk down your neighborhood. There's probably plenty of people that are growing it. It is a plant that everybody has access to that's 21 years of age or older. And I can tell you that there is a lot of people that grow it. I mean, the access is here. There's no question that the access is here. The access is growing. And I don't think that's something that we can control. I think that as this industry does grow, we can slow ourselves down and say that we don't want to enter into that realm, potentially allowing other avenues for consumption, or we can take a secondary route and allow it with hopes or anticipation that it's going to reduce the amount of off-site or illicit use or access per se.
Another question would be, is there data that shows the number of traffic citations that have been issued to individuals with a medical license? That's that.
I can tell you, after speaking with commanding officers at the Brunswick PD and the Brunswick chief regarding this specific thing, cannabis is not something that they worry about. It is something that happens. Yes, people drive under the influence of cannabis, but it's not something that they focus their concern on. I can't put words in their mouth, but I would say that most of them are like, well, when we pull up on them, things go great because they put their hands on the wheel and they're calm. They may be impaired, but they're not a jerk because they're not on pills and they're not drinking. So the level of citations I can't answer, but I know that the concern from on the Brunswick side, I have not yet had conversations with Topsham in any way, but on the Brunswick side, the concern is not really necessarily there.
I would certainly say that that's unfortunate then, because it is illegal to be in the vehicle and operate a vehicle under the use of. And I can tell you from my experience, and granted it's in the Lewis and Auburn area, it is a tremendous amount of people who are in their vehicle using it illegally.
Yes.
Because they cannot use it in public. They cannot operate a vehicle under it. And if that's what the opinion of the Brunswick Police Department is, that is extremely unfortunate. So that would be, that's my initial take when I hear something like that.
And I may, please don't allow me to misspeak in representation of them. It's more about the conversations that we have. If you come up on somebody who's under the influence of something, whether it be alcohol or pills or other hard substances, it's more about the person that is under the influence of cannabis is less of an issue to the police officer approaching the vehicle. That doesn't necessarily take away the fact that they did it or that there's other consumption. But as far as the use of it, that would be
Hold on, so, thank you. Jen has jumped up, your question got a whole bunch of responses. I'm gonna do this, so I'm gonna let Jenna respond for this one last question, and then we're gonna have the conversation from here. And if you guys are all good with that, and unless we have specific questions, if we got questions, let's ask them. But I don't wanna go, back and forth, because we can do this all night.
Yeah,
Go
and I think it's really important to clarify that I have my close relationship with law enforcement. I haven't had any one of the people that I work with minimize the impact that marijuana has had in our communities. And I would say that my conversations with Brunswick PD, I would say that that's a different reflection. So I would caution that what I understand about the law enforcement in their ability to enforce someone who has been under the influence is that it's not as easy to detect, like you can't do a blood alcohol the same way that you can for marijuana, you can't do it the same way as you can for alcohol. So a drug recognition expert is someone who is often called into a scene when someone has been driving under the influence, and they're not always available, and it's not always that every PD has these officers. I know Brunswick PD does, and at different times, people are available to operate this whole long spiel of things to try to figure out which substance someone might be under the influence of. So I would say that I don't think that I don't know of any law enforcement that has minimized that marijuana and the impact it's had in our communities and on driving and all of those. There is some data, state level data that's available that we can try to search out for you that talks about, but it's new because it's newer legal substance. There's less data available. So that would be just.
Thank you. So let's move forward. Do you have any more? Okay. Does anyone else? Or I can go, I don't care.
I have something I want to say about police and talking with them on marijuana. Okay, what I went to certain policemen in town and out of this town and asked them how they felt about the marijuana being, storefronts and all this stuff. And said, I was told they were scared to death of it because they don't, number one, they don't know how to handle it. It stays in your body 30 days. I don't know if that's a true statement or not, but that's what I was told. So if they stop somebody, they can't say they just started using because it has a long term in your body. So I just wanted to get that out there.
Thank you. I'm going to, I do agree with Ryan's statement in the beginning that I think at Topsham eventually moves forward. When that is, how it looks, what it looks like, I don't know at this point. I think, and I was very happy and very proud of our town for taking the approach that we took, I think just 2 years ago, I think is what we're talking about for a time frame here. Is that accurate, Rod? 2 years ago. So we're 2 years into this process. I'm very happy that we had a group that got together, had conversations, was slow, looked at where we have the storefronts and such, and maybe that'll change eventually. It probably will. There's been a lot of things over the years that have changed that never would have expected. But I think we are still in that learning process, and I think it is a long ways to go as the state gathers information as far as sales and tracking and what rules they put in place. And it certainly is a worrisome, and Brian admitted it's worrisome that things aren't tracked as much on one segment of the industry as it is on the other and such. So I'm not going to say if it comes in next year, I'm ready to move to jump on it. I know Ruth said that I'm not going to put a time frame on when it is, because I'll tell you, I've got 2 teenage kids, and when you drive through Lisbon, Lewiston, Auburn, it's noticed. It is the green crosses everywhere, and it's comments from the back seat. And whether I've done a good job or we've done a good job letting them know, it's still, they see it and it's in their head. And it doesn't happen when we're here in Topsham. They have no idea where the places are, right? And I'm happy about that. So I don't want to go just, fast. I like our slow approach, but I do think it will eventually change. But me personally, I'm not there to say, yes, I'm ready to move this forward.
And
So those are my takes.
I said maybe next year to come back and we'd look at it again. I didn't say I was in favor of it for next year, but I think we need to go slow. It's in its infancy and we need to just get small.
Maureen, Matt, anyone?
So, I've got two comments. One, I guess, based on precedent over the last year, when we have been pilloried by people trying to get a rec license in this town, our response has always been not interested, right? So, opening the door, I think now outside of the process that we went through prior to establish those two licenses, I don't see this method being more effective or thoughtful than that method was. If that makes sense. But also, I'm not opposed to this on the, just off the cuff. I guess, Brian, your comment about the laws and the being in flux essentially right now. So marijuana policy punted due to industry pressure to next session, which would be next January. So it's even less than a year at this point. So, but I guess my point there is, we've been talking about data, we've been talking about trying to get the industry more information from that office. They're going to have, hopefully at that point, much more set in stone requirements, or not even requirements, but just more direction, I think, to the medical industry than they have now. Because anything that's been obvious to me in reading those articles. And even tonight's discussion about pushback from the industry about tracking. That the recreational industry has to do that. I don't see why the medical industry wouldn't. It just makes sense to me. So I guess where I'm going with all this is I'm kind of on the same page with you guys, at least in terms of pushing this off until, for different reasons. I think we should get more clarity from the Office of Marijuana Policy. They should get their rules made, and then we can go from there.
And one of the things, just usually those letters for the recreation come into me and I kick them to you guys. I always, me personally, I write as myself and as I reply, is because we are such an infancy stage. I have not heard an outpouring from the community to say we want recreation. Right? We don't have a large amount of individuals contacting us citizens wise. So that's why it's always that we're not. To me, that's my answer. And just like I said tonight, I'm still interested in the slow process. Right?
Rod, you said there's a list of people wanting to apply for a medical license?
I don't know the status of that, but that was something we set up in the fee schedule with you folks, was to have a waiting list in case there was a license that opened up. I don't know if
You
anybody's
don't know
on.
how many.
I don't know if there's even one.
Oh,
Yeah, I don't know.
Do we want any more? Are we?
Just one thought.
Matt says yes. I don't say no to anybody from this table. You guys will say no all the time.
I appreciate the time that you guys put into this, and it is worth a lengthy conversation. My thought on the whole thing is I'm wondering if it's something maybe that we can address as a question to the town so that we can start to work again. Last time when we started the committee, we addressed a question to the town. Do you guys want medical marijuana in this town? And then in that meeting, if you remember, it was very large and there was a lot of people that turned out. And then they left after the vote. And just to kind of, there was for it. Is it worth us posing the question to the town for May so that after that meeting, given what the town would vote, we can start the work, given the scope and timeline that you guys all want to follow, making sure that you guys are comfortable with it. And I say that only because I remember the town meeting. I know town meeting is town meeting, but there was a lot of people there and there normally isn't. So there's a lot of voice in this sector I understand whether they like that or not, the voice exists. But if we were thinking about the town and what the town wants, is it worth posing the question to them so that we can maybe start the work to get into that whole next year of committee work to finalize some of the data that you have, because I'm sure it's there. We can find it on both sides, on the good and on the traffic counts and on the what are we getting for reports on police? That's kind of what I guess my final thought.
I have no interest in that proposal.
And I think, Brian, on that vote, it was very close. If I remember correctly, I don't think it was overwhelming, and it was done at a pretty good size. I can't remember exactly, but if I remember right, it didn't pass by a large margin. It did pass.
The medical or the rec?
The one that we passed on referendum, I can't remember the one.
Well, the referendum,
One.
the referendum was, so Maine went through and they simply just legalized, and then we held a non-binding
Right.
vote, a referendum through the voting process.
Right.
Of what do you want in your community? We gave them choices. And they came forward with everything but recreation.
Right.
And then we came forward, so after we had that in hand, the town came forward, the planning department and others came forward with the recommendations of awarding 2 licenses in this area, maybe 3 in this, whatever the numbers, however they played out. That's what we did at town meeting.
Right.
So in that town meeting is, they'll have their say, I think, when we move it forward to that town meeting. Because the state of Maine's legalization of it in what, 16, 17, whatever year it was, it just simply opt in if you want, under any of these categories. And we didn't know what that, obviously it passed in Topsham, like a 51, 49, 48 sort of thing. It was a close, that was the close one.
That's right.
So we asked the question, this board asked the question, all right, the big picture is legalized. What do Topsham residents want in town? And that's where we asked them, I think it's 4 areas of it anyway. So I think that's what we asked. The medicinal, the recreational, growing and research and development portion. So if I hear correctly, at least the majority of the board is looking to take no action on this at this time. And I think just leaving it at that, not voting against it. Do we want to vote against it? Do we just not want to take action? What's the druthers? We don't have to take any action. There was a request. We can say, I make a motion to not do anything, or we can just take no action. And I can just as easily, which may be the easiest, so we don't have to think of another thing. I will make a motion that we do not consider a request for an additional caregiver retail store license in the town of Topsham. So rather than the rest of us sitting here thinking, what are we going to say? So that's my motion. It's motioned and seconded.
Is it possible that at town meeting, you could have a table set up and signatures of people that would be interested in it?
I think anybody can do that. They've done, whether it be other, wherever you're gathering signatures. I think people have done that in the hallways and stuff. Just like you do now when you vote, when you come out of the voting room, there's individuals. I think anyone can do that.
Dave, who seconded that, please?
Ruth did. Takes a while to get to North Carolina. Sorry, Patty. Motion seconded. Any other questions? Anything? We good? All those in favor of the motion? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Unanimous, Patty. Thank you, guys. (2218) consideration any appropriate action on a request on 2 request permission to allow warrant article for delayed entry into MPERS. Mr. Manager, I believe that would be you.
Yeah, Assistant Town Manager Waltz.
Good evening, Mark Waltz, Assistant Town Manager. Traditionally, you had to make your decision when you first joined the town's employment if you wanted to join the Maine State Retirement System. And if you didn't join when you first joined the town, you could not join later. last fall or last legislative session, the legislature passed some changes to the Maine PERS program to give a second chance for people to opt in. They put it out in September and they basically gave people until November 1st to, if you've worked for the town for any amount of time, you get a second choice to join. The other change to the program was in your first 5 years of working, you could get an offer once a year in the fall, and then to join by November 1st of that year. We contacted Maine PERS because the way that it's set up, our legislative body would have to pass that. And so we said, we're not going to have a town meeting until May, but we could have a special one. And they said, yeah, there's a lot of towns in that position. We don't want to make you have to have a special town meeting just for this. So what we're going to do through our rulemaking is extend that period to your next regularly scheduled town meeting. So I reached back out to them recently and said, our meeting's May 25th. Are we still okay to, if it gets passed, to have people have the option to join? They said we would be. They've given us till June 30th. So if we pass this at our May 25th town meeting, we'll contact any of the employees that aren't in Maine PERS, give them the option to join if they want. And then from now on, any employees in the first 5 years of employment will get another chance in September to join if they haven't. The only difference, the town's rate is the same whether you join in the beginning or later. The employee's rate is the same, but if they don't join, and I think this is because of the IRS reason, but if they join on initial employment, they don't have to pay taxes on their share. It's pre-tax income. If they join late, it's going to be after-tax income. So they're going to be paying taxes on their part. But it's all on the employee share. There's no extra cost to the town beyond the normal Maine PERS. So we would like to make this an offer that our employees can do. So we're asking to put it on the town warrant so that it can be adopted if the town meeting chooses to do so, and we'll have this option available for our employees.
Why is it the state? Oh, sorry, go.
No,
I didn't see your hand.
My only question, or a comment, I guess, if we're gonna put this on the warrant, could we just put town manager? Because I don't think Derek Chancy is gonna be town manager for the rest of creation, correct? But it's just very specific. Yeah, right. It's my only comment, just so we're not.
At the end, number 21.
To this point, we're not aware that he's going to be leaving us before June 30th. So the reason why we had him name there was we figured he'd be here to sign it, but we could just put town manager, won't matter.
I guess, why does the state dictate to the town when we need to have the legislative body authorize something of this tiny? It's an employee, it's dealing with an employee. It's why do we have to do the legislative?
I guess because Maine PERS is statutorily controlled, and they can only follow their statutes. And right now, before this amendment was passed, they're only allowed to let us have people join once.
Yeah.
And then this amendment got put through, so now we get the extra options.
I got a question, because I'm not familiar with this. It's like Social Security, right? Type thing.
So for the way the system's set up, school employees and state employees are one section. I think in general, a lot of times they don't have Social Security. I'm not going to say all the time. Towns, it's the choice. Here in Topsham, our employees pay for Social Security and Maine PERS, so it's not instead of. You get both.
State employees don't have Social Security.
Right.
If you're in PERS, it's
Right.
strictly.
Right. So that, yeah, and I think teachers are the same way, but unless. I don't know for sure there's no school district that hasn't done both, but I think it's usually Maine PERS is for state employees and teachers.
Well,
The payout is based on the number of years you've contributed into it, right?
It is based on the number of years, you have to do a minimum. And then it's based on the number of years you contributed as well as your 3 highest earning years of those 3. So it's a percentage of your 3 highest earning.
So why do you have to say you can't join after 5 years? It just seems silly. It doesn't make any sense. I mean, it's not like you game the system and you join in year 6.
I don't know their logic behind that.
I'm sure there's some actuary out there that can back it up, but I mean, it just,
So
I would think they'd want everyone in there. And, you know, it may be personal situation where they can't join until year 7, who knows, but.
might be my jaded theory would be. They might like it the sooner people join because they're more likely to have people walk away from the system. Because if someone leaves, pretty much no matter when you leave, if you haven't actually qualified for retirement, you get your money back, but you don't get the town's. So the town share stays there to help pay for town obligations.
You can retire early, you just don't get the full amount. I mean, I think it's 25 years. When I first started, it was 15, but then of course, as everything with my generation, it got right to crusty coals and got up to 25 years. And so, I mean, you can leave when you're 20, or 20 years in the system now, but you're gonna get a small percentage of what you actually get when you invest.
Yeah, it's gonna work all as well.
Exactly.
So yeah, if it's more flexibility, it makes sense.
So make a motion to allow this as a warrant article onto this May's town meeting for a delayed entry into Embers.
Second.
Marie seconded it. All those in favor? 1, 2, 5. Unanimous. Patty? Consideration and appropriate action to request the removal of the nepotism section of personnel policy. Mr. Who's gonna do it?
I'll do it.
Okay.
Okay, currently the personnel policy prohibits nepotism in all but a few cases. So we'd like to modify the personnel policy to take the nepotism clause out of the personnel policy entirely. I believe this nepotism clause, although it has merits in many different places, it still limits the potential for preferential treatment, favoritism, that sort of thing. We believe in today's climate, some very qualified applicants or potential people to apply for a job wouldn't consider it because of this particular clause in personnel policy. We also know, and we firmly believe this as management, we've been talking this for about a year now, is that this can all be mitigated through good supervision, management, personnel management, and it would be the responsibility of not only supervisors, department heads, or management of town to make sure that preferential treatment is not given, favoritism does not exist to the greatest extent possible. So I'd like to eliminate this from the personnel policy and open up the doors for people who wouldn't otherwise been able to apply or get promoted within town.
Any questions? We've talked about this at least a handful of, a couple, 3 times. Everyone all good with the?
I'm comfortable as long as Derek and Mark are here. I mean, I'm just stating what I feel, but nepotism, if you have, let's say, a relative work for you and in your department, a family member, close family member, I think it'd be comfortable now, but as things change and management changes, I think that could be a difference, and I just have to state that. And that can cause a lot of problems within the organization if that happened. I just have to state it.
We recognize that, there's other reasons that we've thought of in getting to this point. One of which is just getting applicants to fill any of those positions. As mentioned in the memo that Assistant Manager Walt mentioned, is sometimes parents breed their own and they have good work ethics, and they bring up children who see what they do and they want to become what their relatives do. And unfortunately, if they had a relative here, they wouldn't be able to apply. Another thing is, we've talked about this over and over again for the past year and a half, is getting people to apply also means that well, what we face is lack of housing. People would not apply coming out of the area necessarily, so we almost have to take them within or within traveling distance to get applicants. This could also be looked at as maybe a potential way of getting people that we would not otherwise have gotten. I see both sides, but I think as a board too, the town management has responsibility to the board to make sure that personal management does exist and is successful. And if it's not, then the management's responsible. You can take action.
Sorry, I'm sorry.
No, that's all right, I didn't raise my hand. Would this still work if we simply struck same department from question 2 or from bullet 2? And kept everything else?
I think we've had conversations about either all or nothing. Same department, I'll give you one example, police department, fire department. I alluded to potentially following relatives' footsteps. One of the exceptions in our current nepotism clause is with firefighters, which you see in the last section here, section 4. And I think the same can be said for police department, public safety. I'm sorry, public works, and frankly, any department.
Let me clarify. So I'm saying we keep everything else, but the only real teeth here is that they wouldn't be able to supervise or receive supervision by a relative. They'd still be able to work with the same department. That's what I'm trying to get across. So I hear Ruth, and I mean, I worked with the state for 11 years. You guys know this. I've seen nepotism at its worst, absolute worst, and it's pretty heinous. I understand where we're coming from in this regard. But the whole supervision thing, I mean, there are ways to get around that, where you may have someone who's normally reporting to a supervisor that could be their relative, but in this case, you just change that direct report to somebody else. I mean, it's
Sure, I mean, it's a valid point. It is, I would look at it too, that sometimes we make policies, blanket policies to cover all of it.
Yeah.
Where I would say probably the majority of the time that wouldn't happen. I know if I hired any of my children, even my wife, I would expect a certain level of production and everything else like I would anybody else. So I think it's the supervisors that we hire, the management that we hire, make sure that doesn't exist, or try to mitigate as much as possible. If it's not that apparent. But once it comes out and it reaches a higher level, it should be taken care of. Now, that's ideally how it would happen, but I wouldn't want to have a policy in there because it doesn't apply to everybody. Every individual is different. People have different leadership styles. But again, the real teeth is the board of selectmen. The whole people are responsible if you see something wrong. Hopefully, we're going to get there. In the future, that be taken care of in-house. I guess we could probably debate and talk about this all night long and just have a conversation. But I think it's up to the current supervisor. Hierarchy and have problems.
I've seen it. I worked in it. Here, town office. The board of selectmen had no clue because nobody brought it to their attention because of the leadership that was at the top. And it did happen. It happened quite often. And it causes a lot of pressure, a lot of problems. With you and Mark and the leaders we have as department heads, I have no qualms with that. I think you would all do the right thing. I do have a problem with direct relatives working under the supervision of a family member or a relative. And I've seen it and I worked in it, so I know it isn't like it isn't just a passionate feeling I had, and it was difficult. And I'm sure if you brought back some other people, they would testify to the same thing. So that's the reason it's not, and I certainly understand what you're saying too, Derek, but
I think in all cases.
it's a hard one for me.
But it has to be dealt with. That's what personal management is. That's what leadership is. And I think if you have a problem with leadership, you need correct leadership. Mark.
If I can just jump in for a minute, just going, because we all based on our personal experience. During my time in Brunswick, we had a communication supervisor that was a sibling of one of our best communications officers. And I was the supervisor of both of them further up the chain. I cannot think of one time where the one that was the supervisor treated the other one preferentially. And I can tell you there were two of our best employees at the police department. They had different skill sets, but I would not have wanted to lose one of them because of the fact we couldn't have them in that supervisor position. But maybe the Derek Strapchansky that we take out of the main person, you put it into this one or something. Because you have a good point, Ruth. It depends on who's there. but I can tell you that, you know, there's a couple of departments where we're thinking that there might be a situation where we might have, in fact, part of our reason for this is because there's a supervisory position that we're thinking that there's a possibility, there's a sibling that might be a candidate for it. But then that's up to their supervisor and us to make sure that it works well. And we'd just like to have that opportunity to try it because we're trying to get the best people we can working for the town. And we really think it comes down to supervision more than blood.
The other thing, there could be great supervision, but it perpetuates some jealousy. Like I said, I've seen it, so I'm not saying anymore.
I think we all have, you know, Mark brings up a good point. We all have
Yes, we do.
experiences.
Yeah,
Um,
good point, Mark.
where we have children of that exist in the same organization as bosses. I've had plenty of that happen in my career. And it all works. And sometimes the standard is set higher for those individuals. I would say probably the majority of the time. You know, every day is a different personal issue. Something like this or somebody not producing, it's the same thing. So I don't see much difference between somebody who's a non-relative not performing or getting some sort of special treatment. And relatives, same thing. In both cases, it needs to be handled. I think that's all I have to say. Everything else is.
I just have one comment. I mean, if the hiring manager feels strongly about that they should, at that point, should require concurrence by that hiring manager's supervisor before it happens. So you have a check and balance.
And all hires here in town go through the town manager's office.
So you basically, you have veto power is what you're saying?
We have the power of the hire and no hire.
I just want to make sure, I mean, just want to make sure that it's transparent. That's the key is that, you know, it's not a, you know,
No.
Howard's is with the supervisor. So.
Yeah, since I've been town manager, I've sat on all the interviews through the process of every single hire in town. Since Mark's been on board, we rotate.
See, I think, backing up Ruth here, you guys are exemplary. I have zero issues with either of you, and I trust your judgment. That's for certain. And even your points here, they resonate. I completely get it. It's almost impossible to find employees right now. We had an hour and a half long discussion about it last night to a certain extent. Not that I'm salty. That's fun. And your point about management taking care of it there, in an ideal situation, that will be the case. Here's another personal experience. A director of my agency that no longer exists, during the last 8 years of its or 8 months of its existence, the brother-in-law of the governor at the time was the director, and he would sit in his office and watch videos all day. He had zero experience in planning. And that was just a job, a high-paying 6-figure job for him that he could get away with doing absolutely nothing. And this went on for 8 months until the agency ceased to exist. That was so damning, pardon my language, to me, because it should have been taken care of by management, but it wasn't. So, I mean, for Ruth's point here, I get, yeah, personal experience. I've seen it. I've seen the worst of it, as you probably have as well. And it just concerns me. Like, I have no problem with them working in the same department, period. And if one is in a supervisory position and the other is in a subordinate position, if they still report to someone higher up, like you were in that situation in Brunswick, I think that's a perfect solution. But
I would much rather put a stipulation on town manager. I mean, if this is the way it's going, and you don't agree to it, you know, as an alternative to this, maybe have our 2 positions, not have.
I think more kind of along what Roland was asking, and even with what Matt just said. I think, and actually I'm going to make my comment because I've hated the possibility of losing the nepotism policy from the beginning. We've talked about it a number of times, and I think we've done it in forms of, we've done it in executive session because of what it was, the personnel and such that we were talking about. It was personnel discussions, and I thought when we came out of there, and this is where Matt and Roland, this is where my impression was the individual is not going to have any hiring and firing and disciplinary oversight on the of any of the individuals under nepotism. They would have, daily supervision, whatever their jobs may be, whatever department it may be, but they would have none of that HR function. And I think that kind of is what felt what you were
That's what I'm
asking.
saying.
And I think Roland was saying the same thing is, want it very clear, spelled out very clearly. Because humans tend to make mistakes. All of us, right? These are why policies are written, is because of us. So I think that may help things there, whether it's we approve it tonight, but I want to see something that says they will not have HR abilities as supervisors. It won't be the hiring or the firing. That would have to take place by a higher subordinate or
Formal management.
yeah. I don't see any problem with a
Team leaders.
well, even the recommendation coming to the supervisor, hey, you gotta take a look at this, whatever that happens, but I think somewhere in the line, something needs to be said that family members don't have that hiring, firing capability, disciplinary action. I thought, and that's how, when we came out of the last time where I felt there was enough of an agreement by the board, we were looking for something like that.
I think you described it perfectly the first time, HR, in general, HR functions, right?
Yeah. Does that make sense?
It does. I'm just trying to think of some examples I'm gonna come up later where it may not. Evaluations being one of them. Evaluations are obviously will be signed off by department heads. But if one's a supervisor in a supervisory role over a family member, that supervisor may have some input into the evaluation or maybe do the evaluation. But ultimately, it will be signed by the department and put up to management. So it's how we manage it.
As long as it's concurrent, I think
I think you just said, I think it's a management. I think whoever it is, needs to set a standard that you, as the top level, whoever it is, whatever department, as the top level supervisor, you're probably gonna have to pay attention a little bit more to that one individual line worker because of that evaluation process, because of the possibility of a nepotism and such. So that's a management, right? You coach them up, you get that top supervisor, they're just gonna have to pay more attention to the work level of that line.
It's guidance and expectation.
Right.
From the town manager's office, down to the staff.
Yeah.
I would not have presented this if I didn't feel not only strongly that we would mitigate the risk of nepotism. I can't speak to the future, and we may have here in this position or Mark's position, but that's something that hopefully we have a culture here that fosters good productivity and personal management. And people are gonna have to be held accountable in the future anyways, no matter what they do, whether it be favoritism, nepotism, harassment, all of that stuff that goes into the work environment.
Only thing is, when it says it goes to the board of selectmen, it never reaches the board.
And it should
Never
have.
has. With you and Mark and other supervisors, it's very trustworthy. But when those faces change and even employees change and management changes, that's where the problem comes. And I don't think they're ever going to play back this video and say, this was a big discussion at one time and this is the outcome of it. So That's all I'm saying. And it really is very difficult on the whole organization if people like you and Mark and other good supervisors aren't in control, because it upsets the whole organization to the point I've seen people shunned, I've seen people called different names because of their religious background. This is why, just a whole host of things in my 20 years here that was hurtful to a lot of people, and some of it was from nepotism. So I will not labor it anymore. And again, for the record, I trust you and Mark completely, and I know great supervision, great leadership. It's the future if we change the policy too much that I'm concerned. Okay? You can be here forever.
I think we can come back with you for some language as the chair suggests, because in essence, we were asking you to trust that we'll do such and such. But what we're asking you to do is kind of what the chair just said. So we'll come back with new language to strike this, but say that if a person's going to be promoted into a position with a supervisor relative, town manager's office has to agree to it. Any performance reviews have to have that supervisor's person concur. I think we can come up with language.
Okay. Thank you, Senator.
All right, so I make a motion to table item 2219. Motion seconded, all in favor. Table it, thank you. But you guys will probably have that ready for the 7th, right? Because we want that at town, that's a town meeting.
Oh, no.
Personnel, that's right, never mind, we don't have to.
Yeah, we still have it ready.
Yep. 2220, consideration any appropriate action to place the following article of the town warrant.
Okay.
Yeah, go. There we go. Let me just read it for home. To see if the town will authorize the select board to accept on behalf of the town any coronavirus local fiscal recovery funds, AAA, American Rescue Plan, or ARPA funds received from the town, from the federal government, by the town from the federal government, enter into agreements and other documentation required in connection therewith, and appropriate and expand such funds for any eligible ARPA infrastructure project or lost public sector revenue to the extent of reduction in revenue experienced due to the pandemic, as the select board deems in the best interest of the town. These expenditures may be reflected outside of the town's approved budget. Why I just read that to home, I don't know now after I finish it.
Yeah, what?
Yeah, what?
It's like 1 page long.
Go ahead, Mr. Manager.
Well, we looked at the article that we currently have, from last town warrant, and accepting grants and appropriate use of those, spending them. However, with ARPA, there's some guidelines behind that our attorneys have suggested that we kind of spell out within the article, which we've done here. The legislative body for the town will need to appropriate and authorize the use of ARPA funds towards one or more of the eligible uses. And these are two that we would like to see ARPA funds go to. Moreover, there are conditions, limitations that accompany these grant funds. So the legislative body should affirmatively approve that and authorize the select board to act on behalf of the legislative body. Now, the intent of these funds use has to be done before December of 2024. The expenditures have to be complete by December of 2026. And we're currently looking at projects in our capital plan and look at some options that apply to these funds. And we'll obviously be bringing those forward for the next 6 to 8 months.
Any further questions?
I thought it was gonna be for a raise.
Oh.
All of it.
I make a motion that everything I read be placed on the town warrant.
Second.
Motion and seconded. All those in favor? Unanimous. Most anticipated portion of the evening, Mr. Nixon.
Second.
Oh, motion and seconded. All those in favor? Again, unanimous. Thank you. Good night. Thank you.
I
Hey, Patty.
Good night.